Trevor Ncube must have had a good laugh when he dared Mnangagwa's regime to arrest him instead of Blessed Mhlanga. It was a challenge wrapped in defiance.
Blessed is not HSTV. Blessed is not AMH. He's just a journalist practicing his profession, which is constitutionally protected, just like you guys are doing here, broadcasting to the public at home. You can't be accused of inciting the public for broadcasting what I'm saying right now. I am the one who should be brought before the courts, not the journalists who transmit the information. So I'm disappointed in that regard.
But let's be honest, he knew fully well that the handcuffs would never click around his wrists. Why? Because in Zimbabwe, the so-called justice system works on a very, very simple formula. Punish the powerless, protect the powerful, and keep the business of oppression running smoothly. And when you are part owner of a media house where Mnangagwa's son-in-law has 39% stake, your arrest suddenly becomes inconvenient. Let's start with the reality of Alpha Media Holdings ownership. It's no longer just Trevor Ncube's independent little fiefdom where he can play the noble press freedom warrior. Oh no. Things got interesting when Gerald Mlojwa, lawyer, businessman, and most importantly, Mnangagwa's son-in-law, swooped in and acquired a 39% share. Suddenly, AMH transformed from a thorn in the regime's side to a carefully managed asset where the real power dynamics are more tangled than a ZANU-PF factional fight. So, when Ncube stands up and says, "Arrest me instead," the regime must be rolling its eyes and thinking, "Sit down, Trevor. We are not about to start arresting our own people." That's like Mnangagwa arresting himself for electoral fraud. Pure fiction. And then there is this public relations nightmare of actually arresting someone like Ncube. If there is one thing this regime hates more than dissent, it's bad optics. Arresting a journalist? Easy. Nobody in power cares about an individual reporter, no matter how brave or skilled they are. But arresting a media mogul with international connections? That's a whole other headache. Ncube is well known beyond Zimbabwean borders. He's the kind of guy who can make a few calls and suddenly, boom, BBC, Al Jazeera, and every other international news outlet is screaming about media persecution in Zimbabwe. The regime doesn't want that kind of heat. It prefers to keep its operation subtle, like a slow-cooked stew of fear and intimidation, rather than a full-blown fire that invites the world's attention. Besides, the arrest of a big media owner would send a very bad message to Zimbabwe's remaining business elites, the oligarchs. Right now, the rich and connected still think they can make money and stay safe as long as they don't step on the wrong toes. But if a businessman with a state-linked partner like Ncube can be thrown in jail, then who is safe? What would stop them from coming after other powerful figures who thought they were untouchable? And if that happens, you suddenly have a situation where even the regime's own backers start whispering, maybe it's time to consider relocating our assets perhaps to Dubai where dictators are more predictable. That's a crisis Mnangagwa doesn't want. Then we have the legal angle. Arresting Ncube would not be a simple matter of dragging him to court, slapping him with some bogus charges, and calling it a day. No. This is a man who has already gone to war with the regime over citizenship issues, passport seizures, and all sorts of legal nonsense. Arresting him would mean a protracted court battle, international lawyers getting involved, and months, if not years, of headlines about how Zimbabwe is still the same old dictatorship it has always been. And let's face it, the regime doesn't have the patience for that. It wants quick, clean arrests that scare people into silence. It's much easier to grab a journalist, hold them in prison for a few days, and then release them quietly once the message has been delivered. And the message would be, we can take you whenever we want. Arresting Ncube would be too noisy, too complicated, and frankly, too risky. The real reason they won't touch him, though, is that suppressing the press is a strategic game, and ZANU-PF plays to win. They don't need to arrest media owners to control the narrative. They just need to make sure the media houses themselves stay in check. And what better way to do that than to have a little bit of state influence in the boardroom? By having a shareholder like Mlotshwa, they don't need to storm AMH with soldiers and demand pro-government coverage. They can simply advise from the inside, nudge the editorial line in a more balanced direction, and keep the more dangerous stories from getting much traction. Arresting Ncube would disrupt that balance. Keeping him free but contained, that's much more useful to them. Meanwhile, poor blessed Mhlanga sits in jail because he made the fatal mistake of actually doing his job. Unlike Ncube, he doesn't have shares, political connections, or an in-law married to the president's daughter. He's just a journalist, disposable in the eyes of the regime. A small fish in a pond where only the sharks are allowed to swim freely. His arrest is a warning, not just to him, but to every other reporter in Zimbabwe. Step out of line and you are next. This is how a dictatorship maintains control, by targeting the weak, not the strong. So Ncube can keep throwing out his theatrical challenges to the regime, knowing fully well that nobody is coming for him. It's a safe gamble, a dramatic performance that makes him look like a fearless defender of press freedom while ensuring that the real risk stays on the shoulders of frontline journalists. The regime knows it, Ncube knows it, and deep down, even the public knows it. The whole thing is a charade, a political dance where the power players pretend to be adversaries, while the real victims, the journalists, the activists, the ordinary citizens, pay the price. And that, dear viewers, is why you should subscribe to Zimwaves TV. Because unlike AMH, we don't have government cronies sitting in our boardroom, sipping tea with Mnangagwa's family members. We don't do strategic compromise. We don't play pretend opposition. We just tell it like it is, no matter how uncomfortable it makes those in power. So hit that subscribe button, because the truth needs a home. And in Zimbabwe, that home is anywhere the regime doesn't have a 39% stake.
Kupinda mumugwagwa varwive hondo imi magandanga vechidiki naivo vatana mawindi memavenda varairi dzine masoja tese tatomira negumbo rimwe kuti timanye, ko imi muchadaidzira rini? Kana kuwedza bhuru wayo, kana kumbungo pashurugwi vechidiki, naivo vatana mawindi memavhenda, varairi dzine masoja. Tese tese tatomira negumbo rimwe kuti timanye, ko imi muchadaidzira rini? Muzvikoro nana chiremba, muzvitoro tayasipora vechidiki, naivo vatana mawindi memavhenda, varairi dzine masoja. Tese tese tatomira negumbo rimwe kuti timanye, ko imi muchadaidzira rini?
We've been mobilizing ourselves to deliver the final blow to a dictatorship that lacks any wisdom or empathy. We are now ready to deliver the final push, a push that needs all of us to face the odds and build a new country. We are going to give you a clearer signal soon. It will come before 2300 hours tonight, so that we end this 2030 business.